Welcome to Drawing 1. This first exercise we're going to be working on is an exercise on line variation, and it's in Unit 1, which focuses on line. And we're going to be working in the 18 by 24 inch drawing pad, and we're going to be using your ebony pencil. This one is a little shorter than yours, which is brand new, but this is the one we're going to start with, and we're going to be dividing our page. There's written instructions that go along with this. We're going to be dividing our page into 4 sections. You can see the lines I've drawn here, dividing the page into 4 sections, and we're going to be doing a different exercise in each of the 4 quadrants here. In the first quadrant, what we're going to do, up at the top, we're just going to make a few little tick lines, is what I'm calling them, about 1/4 of an inch apart. Just don't have to be super exact here. Just want to keep them about 1/4 inch apart or so. Each of these little marks is going to be starting point for a vertical line that you draw. You don't want them too far apart. You just want them spaced approximately, say 1/4 or 1/8 of an inch apart, fairly close. Each of them is going to be a starting point for a line, and what we're practicing here is going to be line variation. Each of these is a starting point, and the line that you're going to draw in this quadrant is going to transition. We're practicing line variation here. Remember the 4 properties of line. Line can get lighter, darker, thicker, thinner. This line is going to go from very thin and light at the start. In the middle of the page, it's going to get thick and dark, and then by the bottom of the page, it's going to transition back to thin and light. The idea is that the line keeps transitioning the entire time. You're practicing this technique of line variation. So here we go. Well, I'll just pick one of these as a starting point. I'm going to start with a very thin, light line as I get going. Slowly going to vary the pressure, try to make it dark as I get to the middle, and then I'm trying to lighten up and make it return to a thin, light quality. What we don't want is an abrupt change. We want this transition to be the focus here. So each of these is going to be a little starting point again. We're going to start up here very thin and light, and then let the pressure get much darker in the middle, and then transition back to a very light line. Practicing the transition here. Light, thin, thick, back to thin and light. Just one long transition from thin to thick, and then back to thin. You just don't want any abrupt place. Thin, light, slowly transitioning, and then back to thin. So what you want to do is fill up this entire page, and what's going to happen is it'll eventually give you kind of the illusion of 3-dimensionality. The middle of it will kind of rise up. Just to give you an example of what we don't want to do, as you're practicing, remember, thin, transition, and then back to thin. Always a slow transition. What you don't want is thin, thick, thin. Those areas where we see an abrupt ending, that's what not to do. Okay? We want the transition. See how it goes slowly, subtly from thin, transition, slow, smooth transition the whole way. So you're going to fill the entire quadrant here with those transition lines. Each one of these little notches up at the top is a starting point. You can do them in any order you want, but the entire page should be full as you practice varying that line quality. Okay, so they're not all going to be perfect, but you're going to fill the entire quadrant. You're just not going to do this thing where you have that abrupt start. It's all going to be a slow, subtle transition, practicing this kind of hand-eye coordination. Now, in the next quadrant here, what we're going to do, we're going to divide this quadrant up. As it says in the instructions, we're going to divide it up. We're going to create 6 horizontal rows. You can approximate these or you can measure them out, whatever you want. So 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows horizontally, and then we're going to create 5 columns. So 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. That gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So a total here now of 30 rectangles. In each of these rectangles, we're going to draw a kind of an egg shape. But what we're going to do here is we're going to add, instead of just the 4 properties of line, we're line can get lighter and darker and thicker and thinner. In this quadrant, we're going to add implied line, or we're going to let the line disappear and reappear. The same idea here, that you want that slow, subtle transition happening the whole time, but in this case, we're going to allow the line to kind of disappear and reappear and create what's called implied lines. So in each of these, we're going to do a little egg shape that goes from implied to thin to thick, back to thin, and then implied. So the top left corner is going to be our implied area. So we're going to start up here pretending like we're drawing. Then we'll get a light line quality that will then go to very dark and thick, and then back up and transition again to kind of an implied line. That wasn't really particularly great there. Let's try another one. Slowly transitioning into an existing line, thick, and then transitioning back to thin and implied. Slow transitions. Thin, implied, thick, back to thin and implied. And things don't have to be perfect. You're just trying to practice this transition. So we want kind of a dark side over here and the implied side over here. It almost gives the illusion of light kind of coming down, and this side's in light and this side's in shadow. It almost begins to suggest kind of a three-dimensionality to these lines that we're doing. So you're going to fill up this entire quadrant with these eggs that go from implied to thick to thin, back to implied, implied to thick, to thin, back to implied, implied, to thick, to thin, and back to implied. And you really want that transition from nothing to implied to be as subtle as you can make it, and hopefully you're able to see that on here. And you're going to fill up that entire quadrant with those eggs that kind of suggest light coming from the top left and creating a shadow on the bottom right. Now, quadrant number 3 down here, you're going to create a little kind of shape that kind of has what I refer to as fingers. It almost looks like a mountain lake or something. Just not all that large. In the middle of this quadrant, you just create some type of abstract shape. I think the request is that it has 5 fingers, and it kind of looks like maybe almost like a flower shape or something, but it can be kind of irregular. You see what I got there? Hopefully you can see that pretty well. Let me make it a little darker, make sure you can see exactly what that shape kind of looks like here. These are little, what I'm referring to as fingers, kind of extend out from the center. And this shape is going to be kind of a guide shape for us for the rest of the drawing. So now you can probably see it better on the video. Now, here's what we're going to do. Again, we're still practicing line variation. In this case, what we're going to do, as the lines turn inward, they're going to get darker, and then they're going to transition lighter as we get into outer curves. So inner curves are darker, outer curves are lighter. The idea here, we're filling up the entire page. So I'm going to start with a light line here at the top, and you're trying to keep each line, about a millimeter away. You're trying to practice some hand-eye coordination here. So here we go. We're going to follow along this edge. We're lighter, and then we're going to transition into a darker line as we get closer into the middle here, and then we're going to transition back out to a lighter line, and then we're going to go back to a darker line, lighter line, darker line. We don't want an abrupt change. Looks like on a couple of these I'm getting a little bit abrupt. Lighter, darker on the in curve, lighter on the out curve, darker on the in curve, lighter on the out curve. Now my pencil's not terribly sharp. It gives it, if your pencil's not terribly sharp, you have a little bit better ability to kind of vary the line quality. So we did it here. Now we're going to do the next one. Again, same thing, just about a millimeter away. We're just tracing this contour, lighter to darker. Stay fairly close here. I said about a millimeter. Looks like I'm a little further than a millimeter away. Oh, got a little close there. That's okay though. Lighter to darker, lighter to darker. Got a little close there. Lighter to darker, back to lighter. So we're just making row after row after row of these different lines that are varied based on what they're doing. So again, lighter to darker, transitioning, lighter to darker, and we're really kind of practicing the subtle transition of the line. We're practicing hand-eye coordination, trying to follow these shapes as closely as we can. This is really a great kind of warm-up exercise as we kind of start the semester in drawing. And what we can wind up with here as this drawing extends further and further out is a wonderful illusion of space where these darker lines kind of rise up a little bit, the lighter lines set back in space a little bit, and you can create a really kind of an interesting illusion just by using this line variation and letting it respond to the shapes that you're drawing. I got really close to the edge. Kind of rushing here a little bit because I want to take forever on the demo, but this is the idea. You're going to kind of work and until you hit the edge of the page, you keep going. Lighter, darker. The line should be transitioning dramatically from dark, very dark, to very light on the outer edge, to very dark as you get into the inner turns, and very light. That transition is what's going to give you the ability to have some type of an illusion or dynamic quality to this design as you keep going. Whoop, got way far out there. Really trying to stay close here. To some degree, we're just practicing kind of physical coordination. Maybe you don't have a lot of experience in drawing, and so these types of exercises just kind of get your hand-eye coordination a little bit more refined for things we'll be doing in the future. So the practice is good for that aspect of your progress in drawing, but also you really can wind up creating some interesting illusions doing exercises like this sometimes. You can probably do yours with a little more subtlety than what I'm doing. But you begin to see how you can wind up with kind of an illusionistic or an interesting design that emerges from this. Now, in the last quadrant, it's going to get a little more complicated. It's the most difficult one in this last quadrant. What we're going to do is we're going to start out by creating 3 horizontal, diagonal, zigzag lines. So I'm just going to start here, and I'm just going to have a line that just kind of zigzags, and you can do this however you want. Your zigzag pattern can be any structure you desire. The 3 of them do not need to match up necessarily in any way. They don't have to zig or zag in any type of equal way. These are just going to be lines that you respond to as you make your drawing. So there we go. There's my 3 zigzag lines. So the theme here has been line variation, and we're kind of practicing hand-eye coordination, so this gets a little more complicated. All right, so we're going to do an uphill line going towards this one. We'll go uphill, downhill, uphill, downhill. Easy enough, right? Up, down, up, down. Then we're going to also, while we do that, we're going to go from light to dark. Then we're going to stay dark right here. Dark, going downhill. Dark to light, back to dark, going downhill. And then we're dark at this point. We're going to go dark to light to dark. And then dark to light on the way off. And we're going to repeat that as we go. Same way we've done this kind of repetition thing here. We're just going to get a little bit of a different effect on this particular drawing. So here we go. Uphill, downhill, slight angle, and then we're going to go uphill. We're going to go light to dark, right? We don't have to necessarily pick the pencil up. Then we're going to go dark to light, and then transition back to dark. Same thing again, dark to light to dark. And we didn't have much space to go there, so that transition from dark to light to dark could be maybe a little more subtle, but we just kind of had to make it happen. And then we're going dark, downhill again, dark to light. The idea is we're kind of practicing the transition from dark to light. You know, line variation is our focus here. So again, we're going to follow this line. We're going to go light to dark, then dark to light, back to dark. And it's fun to see how much change you can make happen and how smooth you can make it happen. Dark to light to dark, and then dark to light. Okay, and then again repeat the same thing. We're going to fill this entire thing up, trying to keep those lines spaced pretty close together. Light to dark, dark to light to dark, dark to light to dark. That wasn't very good. Dark to light. So we're just going to keep this going. These lines over here, the space of about is going to be the same spacing down here. So light to dark, dark to light to dark, dark to light to dark. Now I'm getting some implied lines there. Dark to light, light to dark, dark to light to dark, dark to light to dark, dark to light. And what you'll see, the more you build, the more you're going to see it kind of go up, down, up, down. You really can create kind of a fun illusion on this one too. All of these you wind up seeing how dynamic line variation really can add a lot of interest and suggestion of space and just what seems like just a compilation of lines begins to become more than that. It suggests light falling across an egg. It suggests kind of the rings of a tree, or kind of some type of undulating organic form, or maybe some type of topographical map, or even just the kind of lift of the center of the paper that can happen on this one. We really see how line variation can be really visually interesting. So you're going to finish out this whole thing. I'll do a few more of these. We'll see if we can start to get even more illusionistic light to dark, dark to light to dark, dark to light to dark, dark to light. And really, I'm trying to hold the pencil the same way I do when I write my name or write a paper. This pencil is kind of shorter than maybe some of you would have. And hopefully you'll have an easier time holding it. Light to dark, dark to light to dark, dark to light to dark, dark to light, light to dark, dark to light to dark, dark to light to dark, dark to light, light So these are our 4 exercises on line variation, and hopefully these videos have been helpful. I tell you what I'm going to do real fast. I'm going to take the camera down and I'm going to just scan a little bit closer to what we got here, just so you can get even a greater sense of how the line variation happens. Sorry for the shadow there. Line transitions, light to dark, back to light. Here we have an implied to light to dark. See how the line tries to transition from implied to light to dark, and so you're going to fill up all those. And then down here we have the line that transitions to darker to lighter. On the inward curves it's darker, on the outward curves it's lighter. And then in this one we go from light to dark, then dark to light to dark, dark to light to dark, and then dark to light as we move off the edge of the page. So these are the 4 quadrants that you'll be doing. Remember, for each quadrant, you're going to fill this entire quadrant with those lines. Each of those tick marks at the top is the starting point. You're going to fill the entire quadrant. Over here, you're filling all the squares with these eggs that go from implied line to light line to dark line. Down here, you're going to keep repeating these rounded patterns until you finally touch one of the edges of the format. And here, you're going to use this kind of same spacing as these lines up here. You're going to start a line, and you're going to fill up this entire thing all the way down. So you're getting a lot of practice with line variation, doing these exercises. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing the drawings that you create.